Okay, that's better. Thanks for coming, everyone. I just wanted to say welcome, and I know we've got members of a couple different communities, and I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. I'm gonna pass this off to Jill, our cultural coordinator, to open us up in a good way.
Miigwech, Mayor. Anin Bosho. Sorry, that was loud. Anin Bosho, Minomishkiki, Indigo, Jill, Indishnakash, Wapshashi, and Dodam, Michisagi, and Anishinaabe and Dow. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I want to say thank you to Creator for bringing us here safely. I want to say thank you to Creator for all that is provided for us. Thank you to Grandmother Moon and Grandfather Sun. Thank you to Mother Earth. Thank you for all of the resources that we have here on Earth. Thank you for the water, the Nibi. Thank you for the plants. Thank you for the animals. I want to say thank you, to Creator for bringing us here. Thank you for the food, the good medium that we just enjoyed. I ask that Creator keep us in mind and watch over us tonight as we come with open hearts and open minds and listen and respond with kindness and respect, and that we keep those teachings of the Seven Grandfathers in mind as we go through the information that we're sharing tonight. So just we ask that Creator do that and help us in our discussions. Miigwech. Miigwech, miigwech, miigwech.
Jill, I'm just gonna welcome Scott up here. Scott is from California, and he is the CEO of Native Nuclear, and he's just here tonight to share his perspective from his community and give a different view and just share his thoughts on nuclear. So please welcome Scott for me. Thank you.
Yeah, when it's turned on. Well, good evening, everyone. First of all, I have to say I'm very honored to be asked to come and speak this evening. So a big thanks to Chief Carr and especially to her staff for putting this all together. Great dinner like that. That's good. So I really appreciate that. You're probably wondering, what am I doing here? Well, we have kind of a unique situation in my homeland. That's a picture of my homeland, and you can see that there's Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant. And we have kind of a unique story relating to nuclear power in general. And that's what I would like to share with you this evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, a little bit about our overall tribal philosophy about protection of the environment. Kind of give you a personal story, a little bit about my experience with the plant there. And then also talk about the benefits that we have received from that overall plant and talk about what's happening going forward in the future. The whole purpose for this meeting, at least what my goal would be, is to provide hopefully trusted information to you that you can take back and talk about, maybe ask questions of me so that as you go forward in decision making, for a community's energy source, you would have a better perspective on different sources. So with that, real quick, I'm an elder of the Yaktichu Yaktalhini tribe. I wonder if I can do this with this tribe, this group. I think I can. Let's teach you that, okay? So everyone knows the animal yak, right? So that's real easy. Well, that word yak in our language is sort of like a connector word, I call, like the, that kind of thing. And then the weird looking spelling there, teach you. Think of it this way. I'm going to teach you something, okay? So yak teach you. If you say that once, it means person. If you say it twice, it means people. So it's yak teach you, yak talhini. Talhini in our language is actually a village site, and it's also stands for full moon. Now, it's not like what you see out there, full moon. It's the fullness of life. So our tribe, it's basically interprets it the people of the full moon. Okay, so again, let's try it. Yak, yak, teach you, yak, tohin. And if you put it to a little tune, a little song, it flows pretty well. So that's real great. I'm born and raised in my homeland, San Luis Obispo County area, California. Went to school there, went to Cal Poly, got my degree in industrial technology as an educator. That was essentially what I was trained to do. When I got out of school in California, there wasn't really a lot of jobs for school teachers, even though I taught a little bit. So I wound up working for the County of San Luis Obispo Building and Planning Department. You know, all the rules and regulations, you know, for construction of houses and things of that nature. I was hired as their trainer for their inspectors and code enforcement. And I did around 10 years with the overall county there. Out of that, I moved over to schools, back to kind of my passion, education. And through that process, I wound up becoming the chief business officer for one of the largest school districts in our area. There was about 10,000 students, had about 100, almost 1,000 employees, things of that nature. I did that work for quite a while, about 10 years, but then I went into some land development work in the local community, built some homes, things of that nature. And after the market kind of fell apart, I went back to schools to finish out my career in school finance, if you will. But in retirement, yeah, I don't look that old, right? But in retirement, because of my tribal relationship and tribal work, I say to people, I got the short straw and I was thrusted onto the Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant Decommissioning Committee, because at one time the state was thinking about closing down the plant. And from there, the last few years, you know, I've learned more than I need to know about nuclear power. And has kind of led me to where I'm at today, you know, even today, making this presentation. So just give you a little bit of background. Normally, what happens when we introduce ourselves, we like to show you where we're from. So if you can just take a minute or two of this, this is my homeland. If you happen to get to California, we would definitely welcome you all there. Please give me a call. We'd love to show you our beautiful homeland there. It's kind of interesting. You might have seen, we ended that with a picture of the nuclear power plant. And that's kind of an interesting beginning story, because when the plant was originally built, it was actually built on one of our ancestral village sites. This was in the 60s. During that time in the States and California, tribal communities really didn't have any say or any power. And so that plant was essentially built on one of our sites. In fact, that plant, if you were there today, there's some security fencing around that plant. And when they put that up around 2011, the first drilling for the post holes, they ran into a burial. So today, there's still people that are buried around that plant. I can actually trace my tribal lineage to a specific village site that is about 2 miles south of that location. And so we have this special relationship with that area. And we say when you're in our community, we say our DNA is in the ground. We come from those people that are in the ground. To give you kind of a bigger picture, you probably recognize California. Hopefully you do. The state of California, and the red part is San Luis Obispo County. It's right on the coast. And our tribal territory, even though we have it's not like reservation land. It's just our tribal territory. It's owned by others. It's essentially all of San Luis Obispo County. So that gives you kind of a little bit of a focal point where I'm from. The picture of the one village site there is the village of Giiwi. Excuse me, that's wrong. That's the village of Zapatu. And in our language, Zapatu means the place of the whales. And that bay that you see there, they come back like every year. There's a migration up and down the coast. And if you went online and Googled Avila Beach, because that's what the name is today, of course, that's not to us. But anyway, if you Google Avila Beach, whales, and go on YouTube or something, you'll see all kinds of videos of people out there with the whales. Not very smart, but they're out there trying to fill in touch, which is kind of crazy. But it's a beautiful place. And so again, as we introduce ourselves, we always connect back to where our homeland or where we come from. Let's see, let's go forward here. Before we talk about anything in the way of energy, one way or the other, we always try to set the stage and present our tribal philosophy on how we look at things, what we believe. And what you'll see up here is probably a lot of similarities with tribal groups, even maybe your own. But we always start off that we all live in what we call the three realms of the world. And that's, of course, water or land and sky. Of course, we call them Mother Earth, Father Sky, and life's blood. And we all come from Mother Earth, and we're all going to go back to Mother Earth. We are totally protected by Father Sky, the atmosphere. If we didn't have it, we'd be flying off into the universe. So it definitely protects us all. And without water, there's really not life. And all living things on this planet, live in those three realms. We believe that they all have spirit. We also believe that they need to be in balance. We also believe that it's all about relation. We're supposed to be in relationship to these areas and not just utilize them or experience them. And that's a real diversion or change in direction with lots of people. Lots of people don't look at these things in relation. They look at them as an experience or being able to use them, extract them, whatever the case may be. And we have a totally different thinking, and that is, we need to be in relation. We have a saying that we look at these three realms and everything that lives in it as a relation. And if you love your relations, right? Love your wife, love your kids, you'll do anything to protect them. So it's all about relations. In fact, that's going to be a theme, whether you're talking about power, any kind of industry. It's all about what kind of relation do you build and have with the entities involved. Again, they all have spirit and they need to be in balance. Man, quite often it gets a little bit out of balance, but you'll see that Mother Earth will always continue to work to stay in balance. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be caring of the planet. We got to steward it. We got to be cautious of that. But the planet is always going to be striving to be in balance. To talk a little bit about our land stewardship responsibility, we believe that we have been given a creator-given resource or responsibility to a specific area that we are our origins from. I just said earlier, I'm from San Luis Obispo County. That area is essentially where we come from. We view it as the creator-given location just like all of you have this location, and it's your responsibility to steward this place, this land. That's what we believe. We don't care. We're not federally recognized. We're not First Nations. We don't have a treaty. We don't even have land, but we still have the responsibility to steward our homeland. So that means our group is always interested in when things are going to impact our homeland. We want to be in the discussion. Ideally, we want to be in the decision-making position of that area. And we constantly drill that home to our communities, our leaders, and so forth. It's our responsibility to make sure we elevate that. Natural resources. We are all our areas that we live in, okay? We all have creator-given resources. They may be different in different locations. And that is, again, a responsibility for the people to steward and manage those well. I was looking around, it's a different type of water, but we are similar. One of our major resources where I come from is the coast. The ocean is a tremendous water resource to us. You guys have a tremendous water resource up here. And it's a resource that needs to be managed properly and make sure it's available for future generations, but it should also be available to benefit your community here. As we talk about some of the different power sources, that you might see how maybe your resource could really come into play. We also have a thought or a statement that we present in all circles, the little comment on the bottom, and that is take little of that resource. You're supposed to maximize that resource. Don't waste it. And then return very little back to earth. Some people might say waste. If you look at the definition of waste, it means it's something that no longer has any value. If it still has value, we should be maximizing the use of that value. Why? That is our responsibility to do that. I give an example. In our homeland, we have an abundance of deer. I mean, it was a life source, right? And so if you look at our cultural community, we wouldn't go out and take down a deer and only use the hindquarters and throw everything else away. No, that's not good stewardship of that resource that was given to you. We made everything out of it. Not only had food, we made musical instruments out of bone. We used the hide for clothing. You did all kinds you used 100% of it if you can, or return very little. That also is in line with sustainability for future, that kind of thing. You just don't go and take the low-hanging fruit and let everything else, fall by the wayside. It's a different perspective. So whenever we go, and we're going to shift gears here in a minute and talk a little bit about getting more into the energy side, we always take a look at things from that prism. We look at, when we try to make decisions and so forth, we're looking at those impacts and so forth. So with that, let's go to the next slide here. This is a subject matter that is really big for tribal people. And I think it's worth chatting a little bit about, before you really get into larger discussions, especially like energy. The way we see it is that there's really a couple of categories when you talk about sovereign decision-making. First of all, you have the individual. We're all individuals. We have ability to make certain individual sovereign decisions. The one example I always give, I don't know, it didn't look like there's a lot of fenced-in backyards here, but in California, there's a lot of fenced-in backyards. Well, that's your sovereign territory, Your neighbor's not going to come and say, you can't put in a pool, you got to put in a rock garden. I mean, no, that's my decision. So, and typically you make those decisions with the idea of aligning your values, the goals, and also judgment. Is this a good thing for you to do or not? So that is like individual sovereignty. And the reason that there's a difference is that we are typically in in group sovereignty. You know, we're either in some kind of community organization, could be a club or whatever, government, that's the cities, counties, you know, provinces or whatever. And then you have nations. And those are more collective types of decision making for sovereignty. And usually there's some mechanism to empower people to make those sovereign decisions for the community. Usually that's the case. Now, there's always somebody that wants to imply the individual sovereignty. You know, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you get my okay before you did this? But, you know, it's going to happen. It's going to be there. But it's the idea of recognizing what type of decision are we making? Is it an individual or is it a kind of a group kind of, and who's empowered to do that? The process is typically fairly simple. You gather information on whatever subject matter that you're trying to make a decision on. Ideally, this is the important part. The idea of listening to trusted people. I don't know about you guys, but in our homeland, our tribal circles, we don't trust government. We don't trust industry because it's always been kind of a bad deal or it's been an extraction kind of deal. So what does that mean? That means we have to work harder to make sure we get good, trusted information. You know, and what is that? How does that come about? Well, you have to go back and build relation. You know, typically everyone in the room here, you probably have a go-to person for trusted information. You know, in somebody that you will listen to because you built a relationship and you go, well, you know, I'll listen to Uncle Joe, you know, whoever. Well, that's the same thing. If you're making big decisions, especially talking about energy, you have to get information from trusted sources, trusted people. And it may mean that you have to go build relation in order to get that trusted information. So it means you might have to have a little extra work, but it's important to do so and not just assume one thing or another. Kind of moving on a little bit. Now we're kind of getting more into the energy decision, you know, because the whole sovereign decision making falls into all kinds of categories. But if we're trying to zero in on energy, like what kind of energy? What are we going to do? You know, I'm coming from the tribal lens, and one of the highest priorities for me is environmental. Saying, how is this energy impact those three realms? And how does that look? I need to know. So, you know, that's like one of the important parts. And then availability of local resources. Remember, I was talking about the water. You know, how can that be utilized for the local community? It's your responsibility to control and so forth. You're not going to, what kind of example can I use? I mean, I see, well, it's kind of funny. When I was driving in to your community, I don't know what highway 735 or whatever, I make the turn and I see these windmills. And I've driven by them now 3 times. And every time they're not going around. And so I'm going, well, maybe they don't have a real strong wind source here. You see? And so, but then I see a lot of water, you know, and then I also see, well, maybe I went to Niagara Falls while I was here and I saw all this energy going over the fall, you know, and I'm going, wow, there's a lot of capability in different areas. So again, it's important to know in your territory or your area, the area that you're responsible for, what energy source or what is available to you. Because sometimes it's not appropriate to try to put a square peg in a round hole. You know, maybe it just doesn't work for you. Energy security, reliability. Reliability is a big deal. It doesn't matter how much power capacity you build. If it's not reliable, that's a issue. That's a question that needs to be dealt with. Cost and affordability. Of course, you know, it can't be cost through the roof. Economic benefit. Is there any economic benefit? And I would say not just one-time shot in the arm, you build something, you know, that's economic benefit, but something that is long-lasting, something the community can add to, build to, you know, allow children to come back and work into systems and things of that nature. Technology or feasibility. Do you have the capability within the community to support a certain technology? Or do you have to import that technology? I mean, service and repair and things of that nature. Is it a technology that you can train up the local community to, to benefit the community? Social and cultural values. There may be certain types of energy that just doesn't match up with the value. I mean, it's like, it's a red line. We're just not going to go there. Well, that's another thing that needs to be dealt with. And again, long-term sustainability. And then, of course, there's always that other legal, all that kind of stuff comes into play. But those are all things that probably should be reviewed, considered by trusted voices in order to move forward to any kind of movement you're going to have in power. Okay, I'm switching gears on you now. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own personal experience with Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant. I mentioned earlier that the plant was built or began building in the late 60s and didn't finish up until in the 80s. And that was because of all the protests and everything else that was happening during that time as a whole different period of time, primarily left over from the Vietnam War. We had a lot of anti-war people, and that once the war was like ended or stopped, it's almost like they didn't have anything to do. So they switched over to anti-nuclear. And that's because the world was going into the nuclear race, if you will, for nuclear weapons, which was a whole different period of time. But my first experience with Diablo Canyon Nuclear Plant was in 1981. Yeah, I'm that old. And that was that job that I had at the county. I say that I got the short straw and got to go out to be an inspector, not on the plant, because that's inspected by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I was sent out to do inspections on portable trailers that were office spaces for all the subcontractors and contractors. But what that did, that gave me access to the site, because even then, you couldn't get into that site unless you went through this tremendous security process. That's part of the whole safety, mentality of the industry. But what was interesting, when I saw that, I had a construction background. I mean, I knew a little bit. I did some study in that area. And that dome that's under construction, when I saw the rebar that was in that dome, I went away saying, this is like totally overkill. You guys, if you know about rebar, typically what goes in the house is maybe 3/4 in diameter, pretty small, right? And rebar, how about 3 inches in diameter? Gigantic. Those walls, 14, not inches, it's like 14 feet. I mean, they're gigantic walls. And so the whole containment, the whole thing, I went away from there in the 80s, basically saying, hey, I have no problem with the safety of this plant. And since then, there's been all kinds of upgrades, because every time there was any kind of accident that typically, the media got a hold of, the plant had to do something to essentially, reinforce. We have a group in our area. California is kind of prone to earthquakes, and everybody's saying, hey, you build this plant on an earthquake. But it's designed for an earthquake of like 0.9, something ridiculous. And I always say, well, if there's going to be an earthquake that big, I want to be right smack in that building, because everything else is going to be flattened if it gets that big of an earthquake. We have, after the Fukushima, the tsunami, everybody go, wow, tsunami. and I'm laughing, because the plant sits 85 feet above sea level. So that's a pretty big tsunami in order to have any damage on this. And people aren't thinking, if we had that big of a tsunami, remember I showed you Avila Beach, Zapatu, and all that? I mean, it'd be gone. In fact, it would be probably all the way up until even further. So it's like putting things in perspective is always kind of an issue when we talk about nuclear power. I show you the picture over here, 2018. 2018 is the year that started everything that I'm doing today. Why? 2018, the state of California said they were going to tear down the plant for many reasons, mostly all political, okay? Didn't make any sense to tribal people that the plant's built on their homeland. Tribal members helped build the plant, tribal members work at the plant today. And I'm sitting on this community committee saying, we're going to tear down this plant. And we are going, how does that make sense? It's a man-made asset. It has another 50 years of life in it. And we're going to prematurely tear it down. That sounds like it sounds like the deer story, only use the hindquarters and throw the rest of it away. It didn't make a lot of sense. Nevertheless, it was supposed to be torn down. Everybody in the state and everybody was lining up. It was going to be shut down. We created this great big document that basically said, this is what we're going to do when it does close down to fill a $1.6 billion economic gap. I mean, talking about the community going down the drain, it was a big issue and concern. Well, our governor, our famous governor, decided around 2021 that, maybe we should have a change of direction, especially since the governor wants to run for president, especially since his political party's platform, after 40 years of anti-nuclear, all of a sudden became pro-nuclear. All of a sudden, I think he found himself out there that he surely didn't want to have power go off, lights go out. There was a change. And so the plant was essentially moved to extend 5 years. Should be 40, but California a little slow on that. They'll have to work through that. Well, anyway, the point is decommissioning was basically off the table. I was asked as the tribal member by North Carolina State to partner with them to do community engagement sessions like these across the nation to talk specifically about used fuel. Everybody typically are calling it nuclear waste, right? But it's not waste. Remember I said earlier, the definition of waste is it has no value. There's a tremendous amount of value in the used fuel that are sitting out there on pads today. It's an untapped resource that if you're thinking generational planning, right on the cusp of innovation, though that material can be continued to be used. Oh, wake them up. It can be, there's still, oh, everybody okay? All right. Whoops. So anyway, we were asked to do some community engagement work, and I want to say it's been like a year ago now that we ended that little bit of work. So in 2024, we decided to go ahead and create Native Nuclear as a nonprofit because as an educator, as a Native person with somewhat of a positive story with nuclear power, we believed it was very important for our tribal communities to hopefully hear a trusted story so that they would have all the information they could on nuclear power so that they can make their own good sovereign decision. And that's what we do as Native Nuclear. We try to provide information to tribal communities. So moving on, I just wanted to show you, remember we're talking about land, we're talking about water, we're talking about air. I don't know if very many people have really looked at this. Well, I probably want to talk about this capacity first before just the land. You talk about solar, that's a big thing, and solar is a great technology and has its appropriate use. The issue, though, is that as far as efficiency, it's about 24%. Because of that 24%, it also is driving a lot of other types of industry, meaning storage, battery storage, in order to bump up that efficiency. People say, well, why is the efficiency so low? Well, first of all, it's only light half the day, right? So it can't be more than 50 unless you add, I want to say, storage. Because if you have an excess of solar, in other words, if you build a lot of solar and take advantage of the middle of the day, well, you have to have some ways for that power to go if you don't need it during that time. So you put it in storage to use it. And that helps increase that overall efficiency of solar going up. Now, if you are a community that live in a very sun-rich area, I'm thinking deserts and things of that nature. I'm thinking of Arizona, New Mexico, some of the places. Well, that might be the choice for you as far as energy. If you're not in a sunny area a lot of times, you have winters. You have a lot of foggy, overcast days or whatever. Maybe that's not the best source. And I'm not saying solar is good, bad, or indifferent, or not for you. I'm just saying you got to understand what you're getting and whether or not it's a good decision or not. Wind, you can see it gets better, 34. My tribe personally are totally anti-wind. And it goes all back to the impacts of the three realms. And worse yet, in our area, remember we said we have the ocean, the water. The state of California wants to do offshore wind, which is a whole new industry. I have a lot of confidence in the engineers that they can do it. But the question is, should we do it? And in order to equal like a Diablo Canyon, they have to capture 400 square nautical miles and put in a wind farm in order to equal one of Diablo. So I'm scratching my head again going, is that really the right thing to do? Our tribe is that's a red line for us. We won't, no, don't do that. Going on up the line, we have hydro. You guys have hydro around here. It has its own issues and impacts, especially if you're building dams. Coal's getting better, 47%. Gas is 56. Nuclear, 93. That's sounding a little bit more of using all the deer to me. Okay, so well, maybe we need to dig into that a little bit more. What is that all about? Why is that at the 90? That is the case. Diablo Canyon runs at an average of about 94.5, meaning it's running 24/7, 94% of the time. The only time that's down is when they have to change out fuel because they have to. So that's kind of interesting. Then when you take a look at impacts of land, we have up here, we have nuclear power, and then we're talking large nuclear power because a lot of the stuff that you're talking around here are small modular reactors, which actually take less land unless you put several in a row. But if you're talking a Diablo Canyon, you need about 1 square mile to put that industrial on that land. Over here, onshore wind, notice you need 360 times that, or 360 acres. That's a big impact. Now, some people say, well, what's the big deal? There's a lot of land out there. You look at that, that's just a very small fraction of land when you consider the whole world, right? But I'm only responsible for my area. And I don't think that's good for my area. Now, somebody else may choose that, but I don't think I want to choose that. But that, again, is that sovereign decision making. And it's typically a government group, whatever type of decision on that, not just an individual decision. Over there, you take a look at solar. Solar, you're looking at about 75 acres in order to, generate enough. But they don't show on here that you also need the battery storage, which is some more area. That's just the solar panel to produce and then when you drop down and we talk about capacity of fuels, say like if you burn wood, you get so many BTUs, right? If you burn coal, you get a certain amount of BTUs. Well, here we're talking 1 inch pellet of uranium. Go like that. That's about 1 inch, is equal to 17,000 cubic feet of natural gas. 120 gallons of oil. I guess I know you guys are in liters, so I'm sorry. And then 1 ton of coal. So when you talk about the resource, God-given, this is a discussion that we have had with the Navajo Nation because they've been blessed with tons of uranium. But they've also been under a lot of problems, historical wrongs that they have to get over before they can actually make use of that. It's an internal decision kind of thing. But again, it's the idea of knowing more about what's happening and how that is all related. So let's go on a little bit. That was land. Now we're talking about safety. Now, you can have a commercial, you can have an industrial site fall off a stair and break your arm. Typically, they measure safety by deaths versus how many broken arms. You'll notice the lowest is solar. Least amount of deaths per, I think it's terawatt of power or something. It's in the small because it's based on how much power you generate. Look what's next. Nuclear. Now that might surprise a lot of people because you've heard a tremendous amount of hype on the Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and on and on and on. But if you really dive into those and really research what really happened, you'll discover that there was only one death at Fukushima related to nuclear. And that was more operator error problem, meaning something that could be well fixed, going forward. Most of the deaths that happened then were direct result of the tsunami coming, not the nuclear. But what do you hear about in the paper? Nuclear. Same thing, 3 Mile Island. Nobody was damaged or death. Did you know that the other reactor continued to operate at 3 Mile Island for another 15 or 20 years after? Most people probably don't know that. Do you know that the Chernobyl, which is like the granddaddy of all accidents for nuclear, their reactor was like placed in a tin building. Remember I showed you that big in dome, that big containment? They had no containment. And of course, when they had the accident, also, if you take a look at that, there's very few deaths. That's how come overall, since time, if you will, that's why nuclear scores very, very low. And if you look at today's standards in Canada, United States, China, you name it, the safety requirements and restrictions and regulations are so intense. If you went to a plant on a visit, it's all about safety. And again, it's so over time, you learn how to deal with those issues. You prepare for that. And also you hopefully reap the benefit for all that work that you've done, Looking at air, the column on the right, that's the damage to the air or look what's on the bottom there. So again, our tribal group or myself specifically, when we evaluate an energy source, we heavily evaluate it based on the 3 realms. What you usually hear out there is all evaluation on reliability, cost, how fast can you build it, and things of that nature, which, okay, you have to deal with that too, but there should be a balance there somewhere. I wish it would lean towards more the tribal thinking. Okay, talking about water, this is what I say. We have a lot of water. Hey, that works pretty well for nuclear. You need water for cooling. It doesn't contaminate the water. It's a cooling issue. Of course, we have contamination also with all the other sources. You'll notice that on the chart, this is not my chart, somebody else's chart, that you have nuclear right in the middle. It says low contamination, right? And then it says low probability. And then it says essentially high consequences. I want to point that out because low probability, if you look at, is like almost 0. Okay. All the others are going to happen. But they always put the footnote. Yeah, but it's going to be really, high consequences. Well, it hasn't proven out to be that since we have been doing nuclear to today. It hasn't been that. That to me on a chart is more hype than anything else. It's not really doing the research, but we put it there because I'm sure somebody in the audience might say, yeah, but so we don't want to overlook that. We need to talk about that and say, really dig into that and really ask yourself what's happening there. Okay, I wanted to transition a little bit and talk about like local economy. The numbers that I'm going to show you here relate to Diablo Canyon, my homeland, where we live. To the local economy, San Luis Obispo County, which I think we only have like 300,000 people in the county. It's not like a real heavily populated county. $420 million every year goes into the economy from Diablo Canyon, primarily from the workers' salaries and so forth. There's 1,500 full-time jobs at Diablo Canyon. That number goes up 2,000 during outages. About every 18 months, we have like 2,000 workers come in to do an outage, which puts a gigantic, I want to say, kick into the local economy. Okay, every 18 months. It also has a spinoff to the state economy from the county. The state gets other money. So it's a lot more than that. The whole state is about $1.6 billion benefit to the whole state. Locally, top annual payroll, PG&E pays out $190 million a year in salaries in our local area. Average salary at Diablo Canyon is $153,000. California's an expensive place, but you can see our mean in San Luis Obispo County is 91,000. So it's way above the mean. They put in a tremendous amount of, and what does that mean? That means, you know, schools are supported. That means athletic programs, music programs, all these other things, community groups, if you're into Rotary and all those kinds of things, people participate in. It's really a real viable part of the community, and it's long lasting because a lot of the other energy sources, at least people talk about, meaning wind and solar, there's a shot in the arm when they build it, but that doesn't take a lot of staff to continue to run them. So you get a bleep, and then it just kind of goes like this. Well, here, this is, I say, generational economic development, long-term sustainability, all those kinds of things. And again, remember the list, the things that you should consider when you're making your choices. So that, I mean, again, the reason myself personally as a tribal person going, hey, you know, this is something that really should be, give some lot of hard thought on, looking at that risk versus the benefit. I just wanted to point this out. You might have heard the term out there, next gen. Well, next gen really relates to next generation, and it can apply to many different industries. And I listed these, but what I wanted to highlight was the energy and mining industry, because that's kind of like what we're talking about. So whenever you hear next gen, or I might say next gen, we're really talking about only that energy, that industry. Next gen energy development, you're probably hearing it out there. It's hot on the media. We're talking about building some new large scale nuclear power plants. That's sort of like Diablo Canyon types. We're talking about small modular reactors. Well, I think OPG is in the process of, you know, building one now. Well, the rest of the world, the rest of the nation, well, actually, China's totally into the large reactors. They have something like in the 20s or something, reactors being built today. You know, and over in the United States, we're still arguing about whether or not we should build any. You know, and Europe, there's plants on the drawing board. Of course, here in Canada, it looks like OPG is kind of taking the lead on small modular reactors. That's the second category. The third category, micro reactors, which are shooting for 2030 as far as industrial scale type of operation, meaning commercial, get it out. These are fantastic, especially if you're a small community that's off the grid, you know, or if you have trouble getting power. There's a lot of communities like that worldwide. The small modular, they actually build them in a factory, put them on a truck, and haul them out to your community. You can build them anywhere from 30 MW, actually down to 5 MW, all the way up to like 300 MW. And in doing so, they can put them in place, power them up. They'll run for 5 to 7 years without refueling. Now, think about it. Well, our friends in Alaska, which right now their power comes from fossil fuel, comes from diesel. Not only do they have to haul the diesel way out and out, Neverland, they have to run diesel. They have to, and it's expensive, meaning they have power issues all the time. Can you imagine putting in a small modular reactor and forgetting about it, let's say for 5 years? It's a game changer for small communities. And I believe at least in the United States, there are quite a few tribal communities in the interior that have connection problems. These would be solving. Right now, they're working on putting in solar and creating microgrids, putting in batteries and doing all that with backup generation, typically gas and so that's fine because they need power. But I just hope that they look a little bit further, generational, for something that would be more sustainable instead of just, the current. So again, there's going to be opportunity in mining, opportunities in large, small reactors, micro reactors, and of course, fuel reprocessing or recycling or whatever you want to call that. Again, that used fuel that's sitting out there today, it's a tremendous asset that is just waiting to be unlocked. And that's kind of gets us to this part where we're talking about the tremendous amount of jobs that are going to be on the horizon in the next 5 years in the energy business. You can see there's blue collar, brown collar, gray collar, white collar, green collar, and you can see all the different types of skill sets that a plant needs. In fact, your plants that you're operating today, they all have these types of positions. The question is, if we're building new nuclear, if we're building it or choose to build it, where are the workers coming from? They're all in high school today. 5 years from now, they're all those tradespeople. And now this is where it kind of gets dear to my heart because I'm an educator. We have tribal communities. In the United States, we have actual tribal high schools that are funded by, the federal government, not local. And quite often those students are left out because no one's there to just share with them the opportunities that potentially are out there. All I know is when I was in high school, there you can probably think of that one person that kind of made that decision for you because I didn't know I could do that, and you kind of went down that path. Well, we owe it to the next generation to share all the information we possibly can so they can go back and make that individual sovereign decision on what they want to do. If we hold that information from that generation, that's really doing a disservice to the next generation coming up. I mean, that's the way I'm looking at it. I've dealt with a lot of tribal communities, and I can say this because I'm an elder. There are some elders that were going, we don't want to talk about it. And we're saying, well, okay, maybe you don't want to talk about it, but you shouldn't really keep the information flow from going to the next generation, because there is, a decision to be made down the road. So I just wanted to point that out. I don't know. They estimate there's even like 300,000 jobs available, come to whatever. It's some tremendous amount. And there's all kinds. I always tell the story at Diablo. I say, oh, you're a diver, like skin diver, diver? You like diving? You like swimming? You want to come work at Diablo Canyon? And they're all going, what do you need a diver for? Well, we have that intake. I think some of your plants have the intake from the water. Well, we have to have divers go down, clean, check, do all those kinds of things. And all I know is that 6 divers that is a little diving pool, they love it. They think they're their dream job. They make good money too. So anyway, just kind of takeaways. Just kind of like my thoughts, project outreach. Whenever you're talking about project development, it's all about community engagement, but it has to be done in respectful way. And the idea that you're trying to gather information. If you have a group come together and all they want to do is be on one side of the coin or the other, it's like, oh, okay, that's not going to fly very well because you need to be have an open heart to be able to talk on a good level. So, but it's important. It's more and earlier the engagement, the better for everyone. Looking at that overall project engagement, again, going back to trusted information. transparent information. You need to have trusted voices come in to provide information. And then, of course, it's always a sovereign decision by the community. What is best for the community? What do they want? And of course, the communities handle that all differently. But it is really kind of a community decision there. Just some closing thoughts. We call it traditional native knowledge. And that is, it's grounded in the overall impacts on Mother Earth, Father Sky and water. And, the idea of the knowledge is that kind of relates to my concept of 7-generation planning. A lot of the times tribal people think of 7 generation as out, like we're going to plan for 7 generations out. I don't look at it that way. I look at it as, well, maybe your mother's still alive. Maybe your grandmother's still alive. That's kind of like generation 1, 2. Then yourself, that's like generation 3. And then you have your own children. That's like generation 4. And then you have grandchildren. See, I see that as 7-generation planning through that kind of cycle. You honor the past, what has passed, and you learn from the past. In other words, you take from the past that's best for your community today, apply that. And then you're always innovating to try to do better for the next future generation. That's my concept of 7-generation planning or 7-generation thinking. And lots of times what we get into is we only deal with the now. Where at least down in the States, it's always like, what kind of satisfaction can we get now? And so we have a tendency to take the short route and not really think about the future. So, and again, that sustainability issue, take a little, maximize the use, return little. And then, of course, the 7-generation planning that I just talked about, it's all powered by innovation. Any technology we have today, it always ran through, I call traditional native knowledge. It started somewhere. You took what, experimented, you took what the good, you adapted, you applied it, and then you innovated. Take cell phones. I was at an antique shop when I was in the area. My wife said, "Yeah, go to the antique shop." Okay. So I'm going through looking at the little shop, and wow, there was one of these old phones. It's like, so maybe some in the audience, there was a dial, there's a push button, and now what do we all have a computer in our back pocket, I always tell the story about technology, the wheel. I tell everybody it probably was originally a square. All of a sudden became round, and then today we're driving around with Michelins or whatever. Everything has and if you don't allow that to happen because you're just have kind of a not willing to learn or not willing to deal with your fear of something, because what's the opposite of fear? It's knowledge. Once you know about it, then you either know to, not participate, or either you say, well, how can I control that? How can I make that use? That's the kinds of things. So again, that's that 7-generation kind of concept. And just close with this QR code. You can shoot that. You can find us. I just want to leave you. This is from Dakota. We will be known forever by the tracks that we leave. So the type of energy sources that we're building and creating and doing that, we're having an impact. We're leaving tracks, on this earth, on the world. And the question is, we'll be known by that. And hopefully we can leave some really good tracks. So that's my spiel. That's my show, if you will. And any question you have, every question's fair game. So we're more than interested in hearing from you guys. So with that, thank you.
My question, Fern Indishnikas. My name is Fern and I'm a member here. Your community, you said the power plant was built without your community's consent.
That's correct.
And then afterwards you got involved. Um, did it take much to get your community online to support it, or were they always in favor of it? Because what made them in favor of fighting to keep it open?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you kind of dig into overall California natives history in California, our community, our tribal community, early on, we're talking like 1700s, pretty much was a forced assimilation into the local area. It started with Spaniards, then it went to Mexican, Californios, and then of course, the United States. So our tribal community is pretty assimilated, into the Westernly, but we still have our cultures. We still have all those kinds of connections. So as I mentioned, in the 60s, yes, definitely some of the tribal members at the time, they're no longer with us anymore, was not happy that they were building in that area because we knew it was a village site, but we had no power to do anything about it. And it just so happened. But then when you also look at the time and looking at the economic opportunity, I mean, our tribal members needed work and jobs. And like my brother who's no longer with us, he was a concrete mason, if you will. He poured a lot of concrete at that plant. That provided a tremendous amount of economic benefit to his family, and other tribal members fell into that same category. But also, so they kind of took the good with the bad, and took advantage of that benefit. But in doing so, they also learned that this was something that was actually probably pretty good for the community, both tribal and so it was a gradual, kind of welcoming in this new thing into the community. Now, what's interesting, definitely, it's a double-edged sword on day one, because why are you building it? Today, our tribal people they work at the plant today. They're supportive because they've seen the benefit to their own personal gain. But when we talk about the three realms, see, that plant is sitting on 12,000 acres of pristine, untouched land. From a tribal perspective, that's a good thing. Coastline that you saw, that we showed you a nice, pretty picture, right? 14 miles pristine coastline, no public access. That's another good thing. So here, when Mother Nature, she adopted the plant, and in reality, it has protected that overall area from the environment. Right now, we're fighting the state because they want to take the land away from PG&E, who is currently stewarding the land with our partnership, which is good. They want to turn it over and make it a state park. And what that means is that people are going to come and love it to death, literally, meaning animals will disappear. We'll have the bikes and the dogs and everything else. Perfect example of that is just north of the plant. It's called Montana de Oro State Park. The beach is dead, meaning typically there's a lot of things growing on the rocks. They come pick everything off. They get something like, I don't know, something like a large number, 10,000, I don't know, 300,000, whatever the number is, people coming there every year. You can go there on a certain holiday and there's people all over the place. Again, they don't have that relational connection to the land. They want an experience. They want to go there and take a selfie of them in the ocean in the back, post it on their Instagram and go back to wherever they're from. And that's not so that's why we say it's a double-edged sword. And that's probably another reason why our tribe doesn't even relate to the power. We're in favor of it because it has protected the environment greatly. Sure. That's a good question. California is a very big state, right? It produces 10% of all the power in California. So if it was shut off tomorrow, the governor's right, there would be brownouts, meaning you wouldn't have power. And believe me, that's not a winnable thing if you want to be future office holder. The sad part is, this is me talking. Okay, so please qualify. In the last 15 years, the state of California have spent billions of dollars on, they call renewables. And they really haven't met their goal, spending billions. I just wish they would have essentially built another 2 power plants and they'd be in Catbird City right now. But no, we're still stuck. We have the highest energy cost in the United States, other than, I think, other than Hawaii, because they have to boat everything in, if you will. Ours is like 30 to 36 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, I don't know what it is here, but I would guess it's probably more like 15 cents per kilowatt hour. We're the highest. Yeah, and that's, in my opinion, bad sovereign decision making at the government level, because they didn't really consider all the sources. They only went with whatever was the loudest squeaky wheel kind of thing. And that's kind of like, a lot of our systems that way. Yeah, I just wish more of the tribal thinking, at least our philosophy, would come in and say, hey, have you looked at it from this prism? It may take a little more time and cost more, but it's generational. See, nuclear power plants should run for 100 years. People talk about, oh, they're too costly. They take too long to build. And I'm over there thinking, hey, check this out. In California, we just don't buy a house in 2 years. Got a 35-year mortgage payment. But the house hopefully is going to be around for years and hand down over generations. That's sort of like the thinking on nuclear power, in my opinion. But of course, that doesn't work well with the finance people who want to make their buck quickly. They don't want to wait 35 years. So they don't really want to invest in those kinds of things. See, it's a generational power. It's not one generation, like a 20-year solar, 20-year, that's short term, fast money, get in, get out, that kind of thing. Just a different perspective. What else? Oh, I love right. This is the next generation right here. This is going to be the toughest question, I know.
My question was, wow, that's loud.
You're good.
Was there ever like an archaeological site where the nuclear plant was made on top of the burial grounds?
You're looking at one, Diablo Canyon. It's built on ancestral lands that include some burial grounds. But see, again, back then in the 60s, the rules and regulations weren't as strong as they are today. That wouldn't happen today. You can be pretty assured, at least in California, that would not happen. But on the other hand, things happen. I mean, that's part of, and so how are you going to deal with that? I mean, how are you going to turn that negative into a positive? Yeah. That's a good question.
This microphone now. Hi. So I have a question about how your tribe, you mentioned the word partnership. So I'm wondering what your relationship is to the operations of the plant in terms of that partnership, what that means. Is there some kind of financial investment? Are you a licensee? I don't think so. And if not, what's your standing with the US NRC?
Yeah. It's a touchy subject. In fact, our tribal group, and I'm going to say probably a lot of tribal groups in the US, they look at the recent discussions here in Canada here. We're very jealous because to have the idea of equity ownership in a plant is like unheard of down in the United States area. What they're more interested in is consultation. In other words, check off and see if we can get your support one way or the other. Our tribe, other than having our membership work at the plant, we have received zero, I'll say it again, zero economic benefit from the plant being there. It's been a total extraction of benefit out of our homeland. Now, the state and all the regulators and even PG&E, they don't like to hear us, but we are constantly, in every opportunity we can, to say that, that this has to change. It has to do something different. I can't tell you how many times we met with different, see in California, well, let me back up. If you're going to do anything in California, like build anything, I say you have to salute 18 flagpoles. There's a commission for this, a commission for that, commission for this. Well, we talked about once through cooling, water coming out of the ocean. You know, we see that coming as an asset out of our homeland. Well, the state of California, you know, they, in my opinion, make up numbers that we have a certain damage being done and entrainment. And you might have the same discussions around here. But you can't believe your own eyes. You go to the site and you see the vibrance and the activity around that plant. And you say, okay, you know, we may be killing some larvae, but the ocean, if you know anything about the ocean is very violent. That's how come there are so many things that are in great numbers, because great things die off and Mother Nature's just constantly in battle, just keep producing and producing. Well, I see Diablo kind of the same thing, you know, they like taking, but when you look at the area, it's vibrant. So in reality, I had a saying when I was in the school business, counting dollars, is that numbers, okay, numbers, they never lie. Only liars, you know, figures, I should say, figures never lie. Only liars figure. And so when you talk about this happening in our homeland, where the state of California says, oh, there's an entrainment problem, let's do a study. Why don't you just go look at the bay? Well, go to study. Well, hire this guy to go do this study. Well, anytime you hire somebody, you say, well, what kind of outcome do you want? Or what are you studying? Well, I'm concerned about this. Sure enough, it comes back, you know, you're killing off X amount. Okay, so what value is that to the ocean? Well, they figure it's $12 million a year. So PG&E, ratepayers, you got to give me $12 million a year to mitigate. And I'm saying, okay, well, spend the 12 million to put stuff back in. Oh no, we're gonna use that in Northern California to go buy property for some watershed. And we're saying, well, wait a minute, if there's damage here, it needs to be spent here. So again, it's a way to figure a way to get that extraction. And we're real not happy because they're extending the plant's life this 5 years. The Coastal Commission, we have one of those, came back and said, we're going to have you mitigate the entrainment. We said, wait a minute, the water board already did that with 12 million. They said, no, that's not enough. We're going to have PG&E give up all the land so we can make a park. That's going to mitigate it. And we're going, wait a minute, you have a land mitigation for a water damage? How? And so it's a way to work the system to extract. That's my opinion. You see what I mean? But I think in reality, it's pretty much that way. I might be telling a different story if they said, we're going to give the land to you to steward because rightfully it's yours. We're going to give you the 12 million so you have income coming in because it's coming out of your land. You know, and then we can make sovereign decisions on how do we continue the best steward of the land. But no, that is coming out of our homeland and being distributed. And somebody else is making the decisions on how those resources are going to be. So yeah, it's a sore spot when you ask the question. You know, are you getting anything out of this? No. I guess I could have just said no, right? Other thoughts or questions? Oh, it's awful quiet. So that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. I'm hoping it's a good thing.
Well, then I'll ask another one over here.
Yeah.
So in Canada, we're starting to do some projects for the storage or disposal of nuclear waste.
Yeah.
So what's happening in the US on that front?
Well, it's interesting. I mentioned, I think earlier that I was involved with the North Carolina State doing engagement about used fuel. The old administration, or the previous administration, I should say, was cutting down the path that they were going to put used fuel consolidated into interim storage sites because we were having a real problem of trying to find a deep depository for it, okay? Which is probably never going to happen, in my opinion. But so they thought, well, we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring it into interim storage. We're looking for states that were willing to take this on, as an economic opportunity. And the reason it's an economic opportunity in the States, it's costing the taxpayer $850 million a year. I call it for a rental fee, because there's 98 sites in the United States where there's some used fuel stored, perfectly safe. But the federal government, it's their property, so they have to pay this fee to the utility to manage that. It costs, again, $185 million a year. So, of course, economics, they're saying, well, if we can consolidate the 98 into 5 or 6 locations, we can save some money, and it could also be an economic driver for the community. Believe it or not, there was one tribal group in Utah says, yeah, send it our way. We'll do that. We need it. But the state would not allow them to take it because they wouldn't grant them a railroad spur to truck it into their. So it's kind of interesting. So that was the old amendment. Let's go that way. And we've spent a lot of time and money trying to look for a state or encourage a state to do that. Well, the new administration has another thought, which personally I like better, because they're saying that used fuel is a valuable asset. It's just untapped resource. That's all it is. It's about, getting the policy right to make that happen. Because in France, they reprocess it all. Now they're more of the deer analogy. They're trying to use all of it before they bury it. So there's a tremendous, in fact, in the United States, what's out there today, sitting on the pad without any new mining, is enough power, energy. Remember the little pellets? There's enough there to power the United States for the next 75 years. And I'm over here going, why aren't we mining that? Why are we going back to Navajo country, unless they want it, to go get the low-hanging fruit? That's what it is, low-hanging fruit. It's not good for Mother Nature or the 3 realms, because we are building up, right? We should be using so that we reduce the amount. Now, they're going to have waste. All energy sources have waste. Most of it is toxic waste, which is doing a lot more damage to the environment and people than nuclear radiation waste. What people don't realize, worldwide, the industry is required by law to capture 100% of that, quote, waste, manage it, account for it, and don't allow it to go into the environment. Now, it doesn't mean it might not have an accident once in a while. Native person, would I rather see smoke go up in the air? Would I rather see a used solar panel in a dump leaching stuff? Do I want to see I call it a propeller on a windmill made with toxic resins buried in the ground because it's not cost effective to recycle it? Those are all the things that usually when you get on, I want to say, an anti or pro of anything, people are not looking at the complete life cycle. I would say, and then the industries, I want to say nuclear industry, does a terrible job, the public relations, informing the public what that full life cycle is about. And other people, they don't talk to solar and wind about the life cycle. Nobody wants to talk about that. Now, everybody say everything can be recycled, but the problem is it has a cost to it. And the question is, which one do you want to do? Yeah. Which one will get the biggest benefit out of it? Oh, no, you must have another question. How about over here? Got to be a question over here, right? No? Well, is that it? Oh, question.
We're going to pass it around the table. You obviously have some experience with OPG, given you mentioned it and know a little bit about how they work. And you also talked about the equity relationship that we're into now with the Williams treaties.
Mm-hmm.
Given what you know of that and the things that you've talked about earlier on about the things that are important to consider, et cetera, from an outside standpoint and looking in at this, what do you see that either is good for you, positive for you, or that causes some concern, the things that going forward we should be thinking about in this relationship we have with OPG and what we talked about before about trusted sources,
Yeah.
and how we reflect that that source and that relationship going
Yeah.
forward.
You know, again, an outsider or a fly on the wall looking at what's happening here in Canada, I'm envious because it appears to me that the industry or OPG is really making a strong effort to bring the tribal voice into the circle. In my homeland, you know, we're not even banging on the table that we have to have ownership. What we're banging on the table saying, when you make these bright ideas, we need to be in the room so that we can assist with that decision making. What happens often with industry, doesn't matter nuclear or not or whatever. You know, they're sitting around, somebody makes an executive makes some decision that we're going to go do this. And so they start planning and thinking, can we do this? And they look at the tribal aspect. That's kind of like a sidebar, kind of like, well, you know, we're going to have to go talk to the tribal people. They're not understanding that we have this creator given responsibility of this territory, that we should be right there when somebody has that bright idea. Now, what makes it really nice with OPG, maybe the government, I don't know who's driving this, but they're talking about equity share, equity partner. And I'm going, oh, this is getting closer to like ownership. I mean, true control of what happens with the land and maybe true opportunity to reap the benefits of that. So I'm really excited that there's that discussion. Now, what I would say to both OPG and this group, you got to double your effort on building those trusted relations, meaning meet and greet. They're not the enemy. There could be potentially a real valuable partner. And then, of course, I also say you have to push your influence that you are the decision maker. This is your homeland. You have good historical knowledge that is best for this homeland that they need to hear too. And so I would say that I would just be totally excited to push, you know, that whole relationship. Now, in an ideal perfect world, what I would love to see was read an article in the paper that said, Hiawatha tribe just signed an MOU with OPG to build a nuclear power plant on their homeland, meaning it's theirs. It almost flipped the script, you know, because it's your homeland that needs to be making the decision and reaping the benefit. It just so happens that's not the way it is. You have a bigger, you know, folks, but they're opening the door. PG&E hasn't done that for us. In fact, I know a fairly high VP in OPG. Why? Because he worked for PG&E when 2018 and I met him and so forth. And I've already on my own personal say, hey, you guys, this is great. I need to bring this story back to the United States. And I have already, you know, talked to especially the new innovators, the new companies, the startups for the microreactors, the small reactors. And right now they're all in the testing mode to finalize their commercial product so they can put it out. Okay. And I'm over there saying, well, you know, you got to put that somewhere. Where are you going to build that? You know, they're looking at areas, sites. And I'm saying, you know, you really have a blind spot. If you would take the time right now and go to the tribal community that's in that area and share with them what you know, the latest, greatest technologies, and see if whether or not you have early on buy-in. If you have early on buy-in from that group, I'm saying you need to give them equity share and let them lead that for you, because it's going to make everything run a lot smoother. Or you can do it the traditional way, wait and then say, hey, can I consult with you? Can I check the box off? Right out of the chute, I know we're going, hey, you know, what are we? You know, chopped liver. I mean, you come afterwards. We're the ancestral people. You know, so I think you have a tremendous opportunity here for two things, which I think is most important. Build a trusted relation. It'll only benefit this group and your future generations if you can build that strong relationship. You know, I mean, that's what I would strongly recommend. And then I don't know who's, you know, your financial negotiators or whatever for the deal. But I would be over there saying, I want a seat at the board table and I want X amount of interest in the plant. You know, that kind of thing, especially if your community can, you know, get behind that, that's the best thing for the community. And, you know, I don't think it's a far fetch to get a company like OPG to do something like that. They are doing partners with anybody and everybody, you know, so whatever, they look at the big picture and say, how's this benefiting the whole? So I don't know, I would say, go for it. I mean, work on that. I'm sure there's some good people over there too. Infiltrate them. Put all your workers in. Go get a job over there. You know, take it over. You know, other thoughts, questions? Okay, guys, this side is really taking it. I'm going to stand over here.
There's a lot of things that you've said that kind of resonate with me here.
Uh-huh.
So thank you for coming and speaking to us. One of the things I want to go back to is you talked about how OPG has done a terrible job of communicating the benefits of nuclear energy. And it's very true, because when people hear about nuclear energy, they still remember Chernobyl. They don't know anything else, but they know Chernobyl. And so, you know, the three things is, how safe is it going to be? What if there's an accident? And what are they going to happen with the waste? And of course, the NIMBYism, not in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
We're all for it, but just not in my backyard. And so, but I think the major one is fear, which is the lack of education on nuclear. And I don't see an easy way of solving that problem, but I wondered if you had any ideas.
Well, again, what we have run into mostly is the fact that people, as soon as you say like radiation, people just don't have an understanding of what radiation is all about. So that's that element of fear. And for some reason, the general population, I'm sure it's true in tribal communities, really haven't taken the time to learn about that. You know, they're relying on somebody else. And typically that somebody else has, you know, some kind of reason for saying what they're saying. You know, maybe they're supporting one side or another. And so the issue, again, is trying to find trusted voices to provide education to your community about that matter. You know, most people don't realize that there's radiation all around us. You know, I mean, the sun is radiation. You know, we're talking about things that we have in our daily lives put out radiation. I mean, we go to the doctors, you know, dentists, it radiated all the time. It's all about duration and dose. It's a issue. Yeah, there's one right there in your back pocket. I mean, I'm going to fly home to California and it says I'm going to get like 500 milligrams of radiation because I'm closer to the sun than I am on the ground. And those things that we just live with it. You know, that, I mean, nobody really knows. But then when you have somebody tell you, like over the news, or they have hype it up that, you know, this radiation leak, everybody freaks out, right? And a lot of that is a direct relationship to my generation. I can say this because I grew up in the 60s and 70s. What was happening there? I mean, I remember, some of you in the room might remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. You know, had nuclear weapons. You know, I remember being in school and they said, well, radiation, you know, when the alarm goes, go hide under your desk and cover your face, as if that's going to do something. So we have a lot of the older generation, the elders, me, that have kind of lived through this series of fear of radiation. But radiation can be a very positive thing if we just understand how it is controlled and how it can be used to your benefit. That's the story that needs to be told about nuclear power. It also has to have some of the stories we talked about, the impact on the environment. Does anybody in the room think that nuclear is maybe the best thing for the environment? You probably maybe didn't walk in the room with the idea of that. I don't know if it changed your thinking, and you can research all that. That's all like true. And so if you're an environmentalist, which I talk to quite often, because a lot of the large NGO environmentalist groups, they're not in favor of nuclear. They're still hung up on green. And I'm going, how can you call yourself an environmentalist when it has such a big impact on the environment? So then you start to think, well, where your funding come from? You start thinking other weird stuff. And so again, it's the idea of dealing with that in a trusted, positive voice, and it needs to be worked on. It needs to be built. How does that work? Well, maybe OPG, instead of sitting up here in an office and saying, we're safe, maybe they come down to your community here and once a month or something and have just a listening session. You guys might be interested in this, and share, this is what we're doing. This is how in other words, try to go back and build that relationship and bring that information. There's a lot of industries out there that do an excellent PR job and they're thriving. I got to tell you a quick story because I was sent to Florida with PG&E's engagement panel to a used fuel conference. And I don't know, have you heard this term stress cracking? Anybody heard the stress cracking with nuclear? Now, when I tell you a crack, what do you think of? I think of, you can see through it. There's light coming through a crack. So naturally, when you say, well, I got used fuel, it's radioactive and I'm going to have a stress crack, that's kind of scary, isn't it? But do you know what they're talking about? They're talking about, I would call, a scratch that is finer than your hair on that canister, meaning it would take eons before that would actually be a problem. But the nuclear industry, they're so paranoid about delivering, we're safe, we're safe, we're safe. That's a terrible story. I'm in this meeting and they're having this seminar on different stress cracks. And I go, you guys are really blowing it. You shouldn't even be calling it a crack. You should be calling it a scratch, what it is. Does the community know that it's just a scratch? And oh, by the way, they even came up with a super fantastic little procedure that they can send a robot in, because they're all canisters, they're got some space in there. They can send a little robot and spray a little bit on that crack to seal it off. And I'm going, why are you spending all that time and money to do that when it's never going to be a problem? That's because I can say to you, oh, we found a stress crack, but we fixed it. And we're going, that is information that needs to be more widely understood. And the same thing when we talk about used fuel. Again, the simple definition, everybody out there is waste, nuclear waste. It's not waste because it has a tremendous amount of value. In fact, here's an analogy for you. I'm going to give you $100, okay? Or maybe, was that $100 in Canada? Yeah, $100. Maybe not be worth the same, right? But anyway, I'm going to give you $100. It's all yours. Oh, yeah, you, okay. I give US dollars. But here's the deal. You can only spend $5. The other 95, I want you to put it in a tin can, dig a hole in the ground and bury it and leave it for eons for somebody else to deal with. You're going to look at me kind of crazy, right? You go, no, I don't think so. I'm going to probably use that other. That's exactly what's happening with the used fuel that is sitting on the pad right now. They've only used 5% of its capability. That's like like the deer story. I mean, that's not even using the hindquarters. That's like using one antler or something. I don't know. One ear. That is ludicrous. But why are they doing that? Tell me why. Because it's cheaper to dig it out of the ground, which is damaging Mother Earth. And I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, big mining organization. I'm doing a little presentation and I'm having a conversation afterwards. I said, you guys are miners. You're good people. They're good people. I said, but you're mining in the wrong area. And then, what do you mean? Why don't you just go to the used fuel canisters, pop those and mine that? It's like, well, I don't know. I said, that would be the wiser thing to do. It would be the more friendly thing to do for Mother Earth and all that other kind of stuff. But people don't know that. Did you guys know that? Did you know that 95% of the canister is unused? That's like buying a Tesla and only driving it for 1 year. and parking it. I mean, it doesn't make sense. and I think tribal thinking makes a lot of sense. I don't know if that was helpful or not. Okay, so let me tell you why that's the case. There's not the trust in the company, you see, and it's not a trusted voice. I'll give you another example. I was asked to go to Idaho State University to do a presentation. And while I was there, they invited me over to INL, Idaho National Laboratory, and it's the birthplace of nuclear power. I mean, literally, it is the birthplace. And so, big operation, they were excited, and some native was going to come talk to them. So we had the contractor that runs INL, because it's a contract, and then we had the federal government manager that, there's two entities. And they were so excited to have like this little tribal people come talk to them, and they wanted to share. They were just bubbly. I mean, they were just breaking at the seams. They wanted to share with them everything they were doing for tribal engagement, because they knew this big old thing coming. And they did. They put a lot of work. They tried to put something together. But I was there going, well, folks, did a lot of work. It looks really good, but it ain't going to work. He goes, well, why is that? I said, because it's all a Westernly approach. It's all like PowerPoint, sit and rolls. We're going to take this and check the box and do all that. We're going to engage with it. And I said, and then the other thing, the people delivering it, where's the native people? They live, I mean, it's an INL, which is in Shonik-Bannock tribal area, which are pretty positive tribal nuclear group. They have the school there. They have different engineers. Why not hire the tribal people to deliver that message? They're more likely to be received by the tribal community. And they're all looking at me going, this is, and so that's the issue. Now, if the companies were wise, they would say, hey, we need to know how to engage tribal people. And believe me, tribal people engagement is about building relationship first. Don't tell me about your project. I want to know, where do you come from? Do you have a family? Are you married? How many kids do you have? I have 4. You want to build that relationship because you're building a trust kind of thing. And then once you have that, then you might be able to talk project, or maybe at least you'll get real early on that there's a red line. They don't want to talk about that project, but you can still build relations and be friends because there's something else down the road that you may need to rely on each other on. So that's what it's all about. So, I mean, my friends at OPG, are you listening? You need to just take a different look at how you engage tribal people. Now, I'm going to put in a plug for Native Nuclear. What we're trying to do is we're trying to provide that trusted voice for both sides of the coin. In other words, for tribal people and for the industry. Because believe me, the industry has a tremendous blind spot when it comes to engaging. They have a tough time with just the general population. So think about engaging tribal communities. You know your community. You know what goes well, what doesn't go well. Well, can you imagine a Westernly thinking kind of operation coming in with like cold? So anyway, we hope to provide that. And we're not out there trying to sell one thing or another. We're just saying, let us provide trusted information, and then it's up to the community to do what they think is best for their community. Yeah, another question.
Oh, I don't know if I need that.
It's just so people online can hear you. Oh, okay.
Okay. Hi, thank you for coming.
Sure.
I just first want to appreciate how you defined the 7 generations. I appreciate that because I've always struggled with that when they say 7 generations to come, and I'm thinking, but I'm part of that 7, right? So thank you for that. I guess my question really is this OPG and this partnership with the 7 Williams Treaty First Nations, I think I'm learning a little bit more here. I guess my question is for leadership, I guess at this point, maybe perhaps providing some context on what that negotiation look like? How did, because I don't know any of that stuff. And I guess I just really like to know from their side what that felt like. With
Maybe,
OPG.
maybe before, if I could just kind of throw in a comment or two, that might be helpful. I was essentially involved with our own tribe with a lot of negotiations on other matters than, let's say, interest in a plant. And it's a kind of an incremental step process, meaning ideally my tribe basically said, we're going to empower you, Scott, to go do the best you can. You know, we have trust and so forth in you to go make this deal. And then typically when you're dealing with organizations like a large organization like OPG, you know, it's typically the first steps are all kind of really confidential because it's just their system, the way they work. And so you work down that path and you come up with like an MOU or some kind of understanding how you're going to proceed forward. And then you get to a point where you can disclose, and then you're also getting into a refinement point of certain particular things that you would want to see in an overall agreement. So it's kind of a step-by-step process. And the important thing, I'm just throwing this out, is that whoever is in the position to be the negotiator or take the lead, it's important that they have, I want to say, empowerment to go do what's best for the overall community. And, you know, and that's like a lot of things. Sometimes you have to put your trust in something and say, okay, you know, we know that they're working for our best interests in that. Sometimes it doesn't work well to have, you know, a lot of people in the discussion because simply the people you're dealing with may just simply say, no, there's too many, it's too complicated. I don't want to go any further. So I just throw that out. So I don't know what position that the overall organization is in, but it may not be quite at that point yet, you know, to, you know, say, this is the grand deal. This is what's going to happen tomorrow, because maybe they don't know. Maybe they're still working on that. That's what I'm trying to say. Mhm.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. I guess my question, maybe I need to rephrase it or articulate it a little bit different. Because our leadership represents us on the larger scale and we have our consultation team, which I can totally appreciate. I guess for me, it really is, and I don't know anybody else, this is all new. I want to have the confidence in this project. I really do, but I want to be well informed as well. And I just want to know, just from our leadership side of things, what that felt like. What did that look like? How did OPG gain your confidence so that we too can gain the same confidence? That's what I'm looking for. So I don't need, you know, confidential information. I don't need to be that technical about it, but I do want to know how many meetings did this take? Because that's like, this is a huge thing. I'm hearing it from you, and this is a huge impact on community across. How many other Ontario First Nations are involving themselves or going to, you know, move in nuclear industry? I don't know, right? So, you know, obviously this is going to take off, and I'm sure other nations are going to follow. I just want to know, do we have any more information? Do we have other nations that are looking into this? What do we know?
Sure.
That's what I'm asking.
That's fair.
Yep.
I don't want to have my back to anybody, so let me go up here. So the reason I say John will answer some, because council wasn't in any of those meetings. Our AcDev Corp is over here, and they did the work for this agreement. We supported the agreement based on presentations we had, based on learning we had, based on our own individual learning. So various aspects throughout that, and being comfortable with saying, okay, we can support this agreement that our AcDev Corp is working on. But it's also, you know, over the years, I mean, we technically have been, I want to say, a year and a half, and John can answer that question better, into this, you know, that we started getting, as in the AcDev Corp, more involved in the agreement, the economic benefits side. But in meetings, as say leadership, and sitting in meetings with consultation. I want to make sure they're separate because consultation doesn't have anything to do with the agreement. They're still doing their work. They're still doing studies. They're still doing all that work. So part of what made us comfortable is, one, it's already in our backyard. It's the SMR is going into Darlington. It's been there 26 years. And then Pickering's just down the road, and it's been there since 1966, I think, give or 67. So it's been in our backyard. And similar, I guess, to what Scott said, was we've never had the opportunity to have any involvement in it, and so our consultation teams, and I mean from all our communities, and thank you, Scugog, and coming out. And Kurt Blake, thank you for coming out. That, we're just at this, and they do great work, but they still struggle. So now we have that seat at the table through the ACTEV, and it's all 7 of our communities, so we have that seat at the table where perhaps we can make those differences. I did say, we did put out a couple information calls and, or notices. We are going to do a package. Actually, I thought I could do it in a couple weeks, but it's done. And we're getting it prettied up. So an easy read. I thought I could do it in a couple weeks. It took me a month. But there's a lot of information out there that we've learned that made us comfortable with this. And then entrusting in our own ACTEV Corp and our own members. And I think that run our ACTEV Corp or the board members, none of them, and part of that for me is none of them and none of us are out to hurt our community or our generations, including ours and those yet to come. I did like that explanation too. So it's putting all that together and knowing that, so that is coming. I want everyone to know we're putting out one, and I know the ACTEV board is putting out their own information because they do come together. So why we supported, and then the agreements and how that went and all the meetings John was at, and his relationship. I have a relationship with some of the people at OPG, and so it's building that. Not saying it's perfect. I know our consultation teams still push them a lot, but now maybe we can make a difference from being at the table on the inside. And also, I'll do your plug. There is going to be a meeting on September 15th in regards to the investment that ZMLP is holding. So keep that date in your calendars. I believe it's a Tuesday. So it'll give you time to review the information that's coming out and then to come and listen to and ask questions to our board. So I'm going to turn it over to John. I hope I answered that as best I could. And then turn over to you, John.
This is like giving the microphone to the drunk uncle at the end of the wedding. I could do this all night. But yeah, I mean, everything the chief said is absolutely 100% accurate. Having somebody like Scott here is great to have an outside perspective. Scott's not part of the negotiation. So some of the things that we've talked about don't necessarily apply to us, or we've covered already in a long time of engagement on this. A couple of things I will say. One is talking about having that trusted resource with the organization. OPG has a pretty large Indigenous relations team, most of whom are actually members of Williams Trees First Nations. And the sad thing is that we've had people across tables from them casting doubt on their sincerity and in their ability to do their job. And I find that tragic sometimes. I've called it out at meetings before, frankly. Emily Wheatung is their vice president of Indigenous Relations. She's the former chief of Curve Lake. I mean, she's not here to hurt her own people. She's just not. Might not agree with her, but on a personal level, the people at OPG are just doing their jobs and trying to do the best job they can. So, I wish they would get more uptake and engagement with the members of the First Nations. So these are the people that I've been dealing with for myself personally This goes back to my days working at Scugog on these things. My first engagement talking about potential equity in the DNNP was in 2020. Early conversations, what do you guys think? How would it look? They didn't know what they were even building at the full time themselves. They hadn't picked the technology. A whole bunch of things were yet to come. So that's how early they engaged on the economic side. And one of the very key things we determined at those tables was we will talk about potential commercial participation in small modular reactors completely separate from consultation. Consultation's got to keep going. Consultation needs to be satisfied. The consultation teams need to satisfy chiefs and councils and be accountable to the community on that side of things. And that goes from environmental stewardship, ecology, water, air, land, all of those things, cultural practices, although picking up from what Scott said, what Chief said, not a lot of cultural practices happening at the Darlington site. There's been a nuclear facility there for 50 years and a cement plant next to it for all that time as well. So all of those things were kept separate, and we as economic negotiators were going to be accountable to that. If the consultation team said, no, we can't salvage this, end of equity participation conversations. That simple. That's where leadership was going to come in and cut us off if that was the case. So to go back to your question about, well, how did this come about? It's been a long time in coming. The project evolved, the technology evolved. We needed to be in a position to answer questions from communities as we went. We needed to be confident that we could have conversations not with just OPG about what their project was, their chosen technology, their partners, their funders, and all of those things. But we also had to have the confidence of the lenders that we were going to talk to, the guarantee programs, and all of those things in terms of what we were negotiating as well. We also wanted to make sure that we were working in concert and coordination with the other Williams Treaties nations. And the reality is, we didn't really get full buy-in from 3 of the nations until the last year of the conversation. And actually bringing in all 7 Williams Treaties nations didn't happen officially until March of this year. So that was really restricting in terms of what we could talk about publicly without stepping on one another's toes, unfortunately. So, I mean, and we've talked about this in other meetings we've had, and we'll continue to talk about lessons learned and how we can improve upon that, because I do genuinely feel bad that people think that this is being done without proper engagement with the community. But the reality is, we were charged with the task of negotiating, we thought, what was the best possible deal. We were charged with doing that in coordination with the consultation teams at each of the First Nations that were involved. And we do continue to have those conversations almost on the daily sometimes. We see more of each other than our families. We did that with the best possible expert advice we could do as well. Top law firm in the country, one of the top investment banks that works in the energy markets with First Nations and Indigenous peoples in the country. A good team. Don's here. He's been involved with me on this for 4.5 of that time period, years, in terms of years. We've spent dozens of hours a week on this. This has been most of my life, frankly, certainly since I moved to Hiawatha in 2023. And the reality is that's worthwhile, because what we're getting from this, strictly talking about the financial equity side, is a seat at that table. Is the first time sitting there and saying we are actually partners with Ontario Power Generation on a portion of a nuclear project. And it's opened the doors to other conversations about other things we can do with them. It's opened the door to other opportunities for your consultation teams and your leadership to do more things with OPG, to get those procurement opportunities, to hopefully encourage the citizens to take advantage of the job and training opportunities that are there, because they're there already. That's not new. All of these things are part of the broader conversation that we're trying to have. And the reality of it is, what it does financially for Junia, which ultimately is for the Hiawatha citizens here in the room today, is give us revenue we can count on in the books for at least the next 35 to 40 years, and probably more like 60 or 70. And that's a foundation for everything else we're going to be doing over that time period. So I hope that sort of addresses it. Come out September 15th. We'll talk about it in more detail, obviously, but yeah, I'm happy to expand on that if anyone needs to hear too.
I just wanted to add, when I sat down, Jackie had mentioned this, is that we also don't want to confuse the SMR in Darlington with Wesleyville. Wesleyville's a whole other site, and potentially, again, this part is still in the consultation phase. And it would be a whole new build somewhere if it goes through. So I just wanted to make sure people knew that. And part of the funds is some of the comments that we've heard, and we won't put numbers on paper because we're not the only people that share our information. So when we will let everyone, when we get some finalized numbers of what will come to the community, once everything's all set, we'll definitely share that with our citizens and ask that be kept, for our citizens. But part of that I wanted to add was that it would be funding that's not tied to anything. So, we built, our seniors' home, but that funding's tied to something and there's criteria around it. So what is good about that in the future, like for today, but also for our future, is that, perhaps there are more things that we can do. We can top up education, or we can build houses that aren't tied to specific funding or specific criteria. And I think that's going to benefit our people that are, I look at our young people here, and that's going to benefit them in the future. So that's kind of the exciting part too, is that it's not tied to a government criteria. So thanks. I just wanted to add that.
If there's no other questions, thank you so much, everyone, for coming and listening to Scott. And thank you, Scott, for coming to our community and sharing your perspectives. And it was really wonderful to listen to it. And if anybody has a question for Scott and maybe doesn't feel comfortable speaking on the microphone like myself, I hate this, feel free to stick around and chat with Scott, because I know he would love to talk about anything with anybody. So thank you for coming tonight, and I really appreciate it. So
Also, I'll just throw in there, if I didn't meet you at the beginning, I'd love to meet you now. So feel free to come up and say hello. Okay, thanks.